would like to warmly welcome you to this farewell lecture to be delivered by the Deputy Executive Secretary, Program Support of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Mr. Antonio Pedro. And the lecture will be on the theme of extractives and economic diversification. Can Africa break new ground? In life, there are basically 2 points of engagement, the point of entry and the point of exit. Today, we mark the two-stage step of the exit of Mr. Antonio Pedro from the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa after over 20 years of meritorious service to this organization. And this is the first stage of it, in which he will be delivering a lecture on a theme that has been the passion of his entire life. And the second stage is when we have the farewell party for him on Monday. And on August 7, he will finally be leaving us at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa after over 20 years of service to this organization. In the academy, there are 2 major lectures that you have to deliver. The first is your inaugural lecture, when you celebrate yourself as a professor in an academic institution. And the second is your valedictory lecture, when you're about to depart from the university, in which when you've served the university for a long time and you're about to leave, you are asked to deliver a valedictory lecture. The first is about your celebration of yourself, that you've arrived. And the second one is when you want to say goodbye. Today we are combining both for Mr. Antonio Pedro. He will be delivering his inaugural lecture, and he will also be delivering his valedictory lecture. He's combining both. Why inaugural lecture? Because this is a subject he has worked on in his entire life. For about 40 years, this is what he has worked on. The issue of extractives, the issue of mining, and this is where he has had a very distinguished career, apart from being an administrator, a senior level manager. When you look at his position as Deputy Executive Secretary, you would think probably he's been a manager alone. No. He's been a core expert, a core professional in a particular area, which is the area of mining. I will share with you some of the very distinguished things he has done in that respect. Antonio Pedro was the Director General, Southern and Eastern Africa Mineral Center in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, from 1996 to 2001. He was a member of the Board of Directors of the Mozambican Mineral Development Fund, funding agents Maputo, Mozambique, from 1994 to 1996. He was a member of the Technical Advisory Board of the Ministry of Mineral Resources and Energy, the government of Mozambique also. He was a member of the National Commission for Privatization and Restructuring of State Mining Companies, Ministry of Mineral Resources and Energy, also in Mozambique. He was a member of the Board of Directors of the Gem Export Commercial Central, the GAMIS Limited, which is a joint venture gemstone marketing company in Maputo, Mozambique. He was Executive Director, Society Mineral Combo, Garnet Mining Joint Venture Company, Maputo, and it goes on and on and on and on and on and on. So you can understand why he will be giving us a final word on how we need to move on extractives and economic diversification in Africa. What is it that we need to do differently? And that's what he will be speaking to us today. And that's why I said earlier on that Pedro will be combining both his inaugural lecture and his valedictory lecture, 2 in 1, that we are going to hear today. Is the magnus opus of Pedro's career, entire career. That's what he will be delivering to us. So that's to preface the conversation that will take place today. And to formally welcome us to this meeting is the Executive Secretary of ECA, Mr. Claver Gatete. Unfortunately, Mr. Gatete is not here with us. He's on his way back from Spain at the Financing for Development conference taking place in Spain. He would have even joined us online, but is currently in the plane, so it's not possible. He has therefore delegated the very honorable Chief of Staff, Abu Dio, to speak on his behalf. So on that note, Abu, Please, you have the floor on behalf of the boss.
Thank you. What to say now? You said everything. Thank you, colleagues, for joining us today in person and also online. It's really a true pleasure to welcome you to this special farewell to our friend Pedro. Said mentioned already things that I will not repeat, but as many of you know, Pedro's leadership has had really an immense impact of ECA and also in Africa. So I think this is a rare opportunity to listen to him and learn from his experience, but also learn from his wise advices that he will share with us in this forum. So for those who are joining also virtually, we are glad to have you with us, and we are really excited to hear from Pedro. So without further delay, I will leave it back to Said to really open it and go to the, like I said, most important things.
Thank you. Can we give him a round of applause, please? Today is the Executive Secretary. Please clap for him. I would like to recognize our distinguished discussants who are here with us. Professor Akebe Kwabai, who is a former minister here in Ethiopia and currently a professor at the British Academy at the SOAS University of London, is joining us online. We have Dr. Lisa Sachs of the Columbia Center. She's the director of the Columbia Center for Sustainable Investments in Columbia in the United States. We have Dr. Yao Graham, who is here with us. He is the executive director of the Third World Network based in Accra, Ghana, and also Dr. Anna Elizabeth Basita, who is at the Center for Energy, Petroleum, Mineral Law and Policy at the University of Dundee in the United Kingdom. So you are most welcome, distinguished discussants. I want you to critique Pedro's presentation so badly. That's why you are here. Please don't just say everything is well. You know, we want you to do justice to that so that you can give us a pathway forward in what we need to do and what we need to do differently. Can we see whether the former executive secretary of ECA, Miss Vera Songwe, whether she's here with us? Because we had invited her to give us some remarks at the very beginning. Dr. Vera Songwe, are you here with us? It doesn't seem she has joined. So we move straight to the presentation. So, Museo Antonio Pedro, your magnus opus, please. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Let me use this opportunity first to thank all of you for being here and to thank the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa for the opportunity that gave me to serve the organization. This would have not been possible really without the recruitment campaign that Dr. Mwako launched early in the 2000s, which was aimed at bringing what he called new blood to the organization. So there was a group of us, many of us, at that stage, relatively young, who came with lots of energy, passion to try and change the world. So I'm really very thankful for that opportunity and the many friends and the many discussions that we had at that time. But what I'm going to show and share with you today is a result of collaboration with many colleagues within ECA and outside of ECA. Some of them are part of the discussants, from Professor Akabe to Lisa and Elizabeth Bastida to Yao. All of them, one way or another, were part of the my experience working at ECA. Others have long gone, like Wilfred Lombe, like the Commissioner for Trade and Industry in the African Union Commission, Madame Elizabeth Tanku. Without her, some of the things that I'll be referring to would have not been possible. There are some young ones also. I mean, some were my mentees, like Joan Swan, like Marit Kitao, who's now the worked before with the African Mineral Development Center, and many other colleagues. So to all of you, thank you very much. And to the Saids and Roberts of this world, I mean, we're in the trench together. So this is really an opportunity for me to say thank you. I chose this title because, I mean, I'm a mineral exploration geologist by training, but with my work here at ECA, I started to learn that there's a larger world there outside of mining, and that we need really to look at the extractive industries and the mineral sector in particular as just an input to a much larger effort, which is really about structural transformation, is about making sure that we diversify our economies. I mean, hence, for example, the presence of Professor Akebe, with whom, I mean, we've started working, doing interesting things when I was in East Africa, in Kigali, Rwanda. So, and this conversation, next slide please, starts with the work of someone that really marked the generations with his work, leadership in trying to articulate how the extractive industry and mining would contribute to sustained development. And this is Luke Danielson. And I called his task an Herculean task because, I mean, when this process, the mining, minerals, and sustained development process started, mining was considered the dirtiest industry in the world. And it was very difficult for any actor in the sector to even mobilize financing and attract investments and so on. So mining companies, governments, and everybody were looking for solutions to change that image. The mining and minerals and sustained development process was an effort across the entire globe to try and articulate that process. I had the opportunity to contribute to the Southern Africa chapter of this exercise. And the title is Breaking New Ground. So with the MMSD process, the extractive industry was supposed to have broken new ground. And I'm contextualize that effort to break new ground in Africa. That's why I'm asking whether Africa is breaking new ground in its effort to promote sustainable development in the extractive sector. Next slide. So this, you'll have a chance, this presentation will be available to you, but in this news release, it basically states what I said earlier. It recognizes the perceptions, the bad perceptions that the sector attracted, and the effort that through this platform, all the actors, governments, private sector, civil society organization engage into trying to articulate a new path forward. Next slide. So in our case, as you know, this effort is really about addressing the paradox of plenty, where we have the largest reserves of very important minerals, and yet we are at the bottom of every other indicator, poverty being a reflection of it. And that's why I'm saying that for us on the continent, this is a case of addressing the paradox of plenty. It's about fighting mineral poverty and securing mineral security for all. These are very interesting concepts. We talk about food security, and a very good friend of mine, Daniel Franks, tried to articulate the same problematic with respect to the extractive industry and minerals, by indicating that in many of the resource-rich developing countries, our resources are meant only to serve the other parts of the world, and they are not used for addressing the basic needs of our populations, including access to energy. And as you know, 600 million people on the continent don't have access to energy. This is just many of other aspects of what he called mineral poverty. So the effort, therefore, for us is to ensure that first and foremost, our resources should enable us to achieve what he calls mineral security, which is to start with utilizing our resource to address our basic needs, including shelter, access to shelter, utilizing the non-metallic minerals, for example, to ensure that everybody on the continent has access to decent housing. Next slide. So this paper, which you can access later, introduced this concept, is an important departure in the way we discuss the problematic of the extractive industry. And next slide. So it is an effort where through different platforms, I, as Said indicated, was involved. This includes, for example, in my capacity as the co-chair of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network thematic group on good governance of extractives and land resources, which I was co-chairing when we launched this with Paul Collier. Later, it was with Professor, with Lisa Sachs and another colleague. So in this particular paper, this was just when the rest of the world and us also, we're trying to articulate the successor framework to the Millennium Development Goals. So there was part of the post-2015 development agenda. And we're trying to argue that extractive resources should be included in the definitions of the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is, in this particular piece or think piece, we articulate the problematic of natural resource development and how to address them. And part of this effort included us writing to the then President of the General Assembly to try and advocate for the inclusion of a specific SDG on extractives. Unfortunately, we failed. And I would argue we failed because of the fact that the extractive industry had a very, very bad image. So it's a sector that you would agree with me, even if you are not part of the, or deep into the extractive industry, that is a very dynamic, and it has all sorts of factors driving it. And the reference to a spaghetti bowl really tries to capture the very complicated relationships that exist in the sector. It's a sector where we have different interests. We have the so-called home countries, where their main drive, their main preoccupations is to secure access to resources, whilst the host countries, which are the resource-rich countries, including those in Africa, they are preoccupied, among other things, in utilizing those resources to promote structural transformation, address poverty, and secure mineral security, as I indicated earlier. It's a sector that is also characterized by very, very deep intensity, in the sense that the ability of the sector to capital intensity to create jobs is not obvious unless you design specific policies to achieve that. And we will go to that particular issue on how to maximize job creation in a sector that intrinsically don't have that potential because of its capital intensity. But again, you'll have access to this, so I don't have to to go into all the details which are in my slides. And it is a sector also where there are different perceptions on what constitutes values and benefits. I mean, in here, we have to remind that there are many and different stakeholders involved in the sector, and each of those sectors, those stakeholders are driven by different interests. So through a work that I've equally had a pleasure to participate with through the World Economic Forum, Global Agenda Council on the future of mining, we designed what we call the Minerals Value Management Framework, which is a framework that recognizes that difference of interests and indicates that for us to be able to break new ground, let me use that word, we need to bridge those differences of perceptions. And this includes, for example, governments that are preoccupied in maximizing the revenue flows through the fiscal and legal and regulatory environment. That's what you'll obtain in many of the contracts that we sign. There's lots of battles that are fought in trying to fix the fiscal regime that will govern the contract. Whilst, of course, local communities and especially in mine-producing areas, they would like employment and they would like to acquire skills and so on and so forth. And many would like mining, but mining that does not impact their environment and their social fabric and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, in many of our countries, the mining industry constitutes an enclave with little linkages with the rest of the economy. So the procurement and the supply industry becomes, again, an area to try and reduce those difference of perceptions. Beneficiation and downstream industry, again, is a major, major part of what we do. Mining, because of its relatively better fundamentals, can finance infrastructure. And the key is to ensure that that infrastructure is not there only to serve mining, but it can be used to open up opportunities in other sectors of the economy. So that's, again, another area that we need to look at in trying to maximize value from the extractive sector. It's a sector that, because of those different perceptions of what constitutes value, can lead to mine-related conflicts. And there is just a sample of many of the conflicts that were driven because, indeed, of those factors. Next slide. So, and this is indeed what we're trying to achieve with our discussions today, is how can we reconcile these differences and foster shared value creation. So value creation not only for governments and mining companies, but equally so for all of those stakeholders that I've mentioned before. And for our continent, next slide. So for our continent, that question is existential. Is existential because in many of our countries are resource-rich dependent countries, as I've mentioned several times today already, and where natural capital contributes significantly to GDP formation. Meaning, if we do not change the nature, the structural nature of our industry, then we'll be forever dependent on the vagaries of that sector. In other words, the changes in commodity prices, for example, create all sorts of very, very vexed problems which are very difficult to resolve. When commodity prices go down, revenue flows go down, and macroeconomic instability installs in many of our countries. So that's why it's absolutely important for the continent to try and address those structural problems. And that's why through working here at ECA, I've learned to go beyond being a mineral exploration geologist to now becoming a little bit more interested in economic diversification and everything else. And the next slide captures what I was trying to say, that commodity dependence really exacerbates some of the problems that we have because we suffer from what's called the terms of trade shocks, namely, I mean, if prices go down or up, then we could have a bonanza, or we can have macroeconomic instability. And that macroeconomic instability can create all sorts of other factors as captured in this diagram. And this is for countries that overall on the continent don't have the fiscal space to sort of a buffer to respond to those price shocks, sort of changes, then it becomes a serious problem. So again, as everybody knows, whether you are in or out in the sector, we are locked in the lower ends of global value chains, mainly as exporters of raw materials. And the value is of course, in the higher levels of the higher levels of the value chains, where minerals are transformed into manufactured goods and products. And this is where the battle is. It is really, if you see in many of our national development plans, visions, and strategies, you will see that aspiration to break this vicious cycle or circle of dependence, circle of being trapped in this bottom end of global value chains. Here at ECA, we've launched a major program on regional value chain development aimed at addressing those issues. You will find as a reflection of that aspiration of our member states in these two documents here, the Africa Mining Vision, which was adopted in 2009, and the more recent one, which is the African Green Mineral Strategy, which was adopted in the last AU Summit, a reflection of this imperative, which is to break the resource curse, to break the mineral poverty trap, and extractivism. Extractivism, for me, is a very important concept, which is really the dependence on the extractive sector, which I would argue is a construct which we inherit from colonial times, which unfortunately we haven't yet been able to break away from it. So these visions are an effort towards addressing that structural problem. And you'll find it from the Lagos Plan of Action to the most recent instruments, such as the African Green Mineral Strategy. So Alberto Acosta, again, don't have time to go through all of this, is really the guru on anything to do of extractivism. And in this particular paper, he argues that extractivism or any other recent form, which he calls neo-extractivism, are two sides of the same curse. And for us in Africa, this curse is really the poverty trap and the mineral poverty that I referred to earlier. So it is about a conversation today, next slide, is indeed about moving from enclaves to a well-linked resource sector with increased value addition, resource-based industrialization, and local content. These two papers, this one, the first one, Mainstreaming Mineral Wealth in Growth and Poverty Reduction Strategy, as the name suggests, was written during the days of the poverty reduction strategic papers. And the argument is that we needed to capture in those poverty reduction strategic papers also the contribution of the extractive sector to poverty alleviation. So it's one of the papers that I write when I've arrived here. And I really like to thank Yinka Adeyemi for really helping me to put this in a saleable manner. And then the second paper, Minerals Cluster Policy Study in Africa, the policy studies of South Africa and Mozambique, of course Mozambique because I come from Mozambique, was really to compare a mature country like South Africa, mature mineral country like South Africa, and of course an infant mineral country like Mozambique, and then to discuss the extent to which clusters were developed, the linkages were developed, and what are the instruments that for those infant countries who need to go through to ensure that indeed we'll have greater value addition, resource-based industrialization in local content. And in this particular study, one thing that was evident is that we didn't have the data and the statistics to support the profiling of this issue, including, for example, the input-output tables and things like that. an issue that I raised later in another paper. So these are slides from Paul Jordan, really that tries to depict what we are here discussing. I mean, a mining sector, which is that square rectangle, sorry, in the middle, which when it's well linked, can facilitate the development of all sorts of linkages, upstream, downstream, financial, and otherwise. And that's the aspiration that is captured in the visions that I've mentioned earlier. So next slide, also from Paul Jordan, is exactly the same thing. And again, with time, you'll go through it, but it's really about making sure that the sector is linked, and it's not an enclave. And you would argue that perhaps this is a conversation of the 2000s or so. I would say no. And a reflection of this is this particular slide, the next slide, from Gabon, and this is from a mining journal a couple of weeks ago, where the Gabonese government has indicated that from 2029, they will ban the export of raw manganese. And you know, Gabon is the second largest exporter of manganese in Africa after South Africa. And manganese is an important input for the production of batteries and electric vehicles. It's part of the so-called critical minerals. So it's about also creating a sector that is inclusive. So in these two publications that we did, the first one is a compendium on best practice on small-scale mining in Africa, which was really to try and recognize that this artisanal small-scale mining sector is an important sector in Africa and beyond. And the second one, improving public participation in sustainable development of mineral resources in Africa, again, was to try and identify what are those issues that need to be taken into consideration for us to have a sector that really is broad, is inclusive, looking at how to mainstream disciplines such as environmental impact assessments, social impact assessments, to ensure indeed that those perceptions of benefits are captured. Remember the MVM framework that I referred to, where mining will not deteriorate social fabric in mining locations and so on and so forth. So this publication is really an important one. And here I would like to thank Fuitsi Kata, who authored for this particular publication. And one thing there which is really important is to interrogate always whether the government take is the public take. Really, this means that in certain jurisdictions, it's not always true that the government's interests coincide completely with the interests of local communities, of the public in general. So we need, therefore, through relevant instruments of consultation, to ensure that this factor is addressed. So it's a sector that contributes to the SDGs. I mean, Lisa Sachs and through the Columbia Center and many others, they articulate how the extractive sector can contribute to each and every one of the SDGs. So this is the publication on the right side. And on the left-hand side is the same exercise, same effort done with respect to artisanal small-scale mining. And if you look down there, you'll see a reference to a certain person called Antonio Pedro. So, but you would also, well, all of these things do not make sense if we do not help our governments and other stakeholders in translating this, and that's part of the conversation. The main gist of our conversation today is really how can we make a difference? How can we break new ground? So through this countermining vision guidebook, a step-by-step guide was sort of defined on how to ensure the African mining vision could find room and space in national laws, regulations, processes, and so on, And this is key. It's key for mining as it is key now, for example, on the issue of the domestication of the African Continental Free Trade Area. We are supporting countries to formulate national AfCFTA strategies. We have adopted all sorts of protocols on AfCFTA, which unfortunately today have not been ratified. And that is a critical step if we want to translate some of these continental aspirations into change in the ground. So the counter-mining vision guidebook is an effort towards that. And in this particular publication at the bottom, Minerals and Africa's Development, which was the product of the International Study Group on the Review of Africa's Mining Regime. This is a group of scholars, of practitioners from across the world that we put together with a view to trying to answer those questions. Are our regimes, so laws, regulations, practices, really helping us to achieve those goals that I've mentioned earlier? Anna Elizabeth Bastida, who's here, is one of the members of the ISG, and Yao also, as many others that I'm sure are on the call, were equally members. This, for me, is a seminal publication, which I will encourage you to really read when you have time. There is a very particular appendix there, which we introduced, which is Appendix L, if I'm not mistaken, where we made a case for governments to consider departing for first come, first served principle, which is a principle that you will find in many of our practices across the country, to say that where you have significant understanding of the geology of the mining in a certain region, you can auction those terrains. And through that process, you can perhaps realize better value than you normally would get if you would get through the first come, first served process. So it is a seminal publication. And one thing here is really about our call in this particular publication for a developmental state. So where we're asking governments to really be the drivers for change, and among other things, to contribute to de-risking investments, something which now at ECA, as you know, is part of our mantra, as it were, and the main area of work. So in the next couple of public slides, you'll see publications that really try and help our member states understand how to promote resource-based industrialization, how to break new ground. The transformative industrial policy for Africa, in line with what we also had said in the Minerals for Africa's Development, that it's not a business of mining only. If you want to change mining, you have to also align with it industrial policy, skills development policy, infrastructure development policy, and so on. So it is that ecosystem that will be able to transform Africa's extractive industry. And this is what you'll find in this. This is really about how to promote industrial policy. And one of the key elements of industrial policy is local content. And local content is critical for an industry like mining, which I said is very capital intensive, that it does not generate jobs automatically. It's only through the linkages, those upstream and downstream linkages, where you'll be able to create the jobs that Africa needs. Now we are talking of 18 to 20 million jobs a year for young people. In making the most of Africa's commodities, again, a very interesting economic report on Africa that recognizes extractive industries and then articulates, again, paths for industrialization, for job and economic transformation. Again, critical issues then and critical issues now, and I'll say critical issues for the future. I like in particular the next one, which is one thing leads to another. And Said here is laughing because in many of the things that interventions that I make here at ECA in all of these 20 years, I always say we will really have to connect the dots. One thing leads to another. If we don't connect the dots, then we will not achieve the change. That we are doing these tangential issues that are not interlinked. So in this particular book by Mike Morris, Rafik Kampliski and David Kaplan. They're basically analyzing 9 case studies on the content and looking at why is it that policies such as local content have failed. And some of them is because when you have visions, we don't have the policies and the laws and regulations that are aligned with the vision. And when we have the 2, we don't have the institutions. When we have the 3, we don't have the staff, and the list goes on and so on and so forth. Please read. It's important. So breaking the oil spell, this is my good friends from the IMF, Reda Sharif and Fuad in particular, which are really, we're looking at what is it that locks countries in the middle income trap, and with a focus on the Gulf states, and arguing therefore that one of the factors to promote, to break that middle income trap is investments in science, technology, and innovation. And this is, and you'll see that many of our Gulf states now have diversified away from the excessive dependence on extractives. For example, Saudi Arabia has created the Public Investment Fund as a means to reduce that dependence. And the Public Investment Fund now is everywhere, including in sports, as you know. So kicking away the ladder, again, very clear, is about, breaking some of the, dogmas there about industrial policy. And I'm sure that Professor Akebe will step in here and provide more insights about this. So we have, in other words, a lot of materials that would have otherwise helped Africa to be somewhere else. And hence the question, what is it that we need to do different? The first one, again, goes back to the point that I was referring to earlier about metrics, where here, in addition to making reference to input-output tables, I also make reference to the importance of having trading value-added statistics, something that here at ACS now we are pushing. Those are important. So because without those metrics, it's very difficult for you to understand the depth of your sector, any sector, including the extractive sector. So it's important. The second one, which Kojo Busia in particular led when he was at the director of the African Mineral Development Center, is really looking at mineral suppliers development. Again, many of the, when mining companies are forced to procure locally, one of the arguments that they throw out there is that, well, local small and medium enterprise are not equipped to meet our needs. In this particular publication, which is focused on the 3C competencies, competitiveness, and the third one I forgot. But in other words, it's really to make sure that our small and medium scale companies are capable of entering into the procurement opportunity. And in many of the large operations, procurement is about 60% of the cost structure of that industry. So it's important. So we have to be mindful also that there's serious challenges. One important challenge is the perceptions, and the survey of mining companies that Fraser issues every year really captures how unfriendly, for example, certain jurisdictions on the continent is. And the policy perception index is one that captures that. So again, we need to de-risk investments. Earlier, I made reference to that. That's important. And the other thing, of course, is that because of inconsistencies in our policy instruments, sometimes we sign bilateral investment treaties and we want to promote local content at the same time, and that can create all sorts of issues. We want to pursue local content policies, and yet our mining contracts do not have clauses like that. So in this particular article, it reveals some of the challenges that we face out there, and that we have to be mindful of what we put in our contracts. Here, the title reads, revealed how Wall Street is making millions betting against green laws, for example. And it's a very interesting article. Please read, and you'll see what I'm referring to. So, in other words, we are not short of seminal publications. We are not short of step-by-step guides, and we are not short of guiding principles and policy options. And this is a very good piece of work done by the OECD development group, the guiding principles for durable extractive contracts, that basically tells what you should have or not have in mining contracts. And yet we'll find here again and again some of these, failures in our contracts. That also is a very good piece of work by the Natural Resources Governance Institute, which is about value addition. So how to unlock that, and the bullet points capture some of the content there. And now I have to move very fast because Said is looking at me very, very menacingly. So, but here is just to take me back to when I was the director of our office in Central Africa. So I arrived there in 2016, in August, 14 August 2016. I remember the date exactly. And the region had suffered a major macroeconomic problem because oil prices in 2012 had dropped significantly. So macroeconomic instability was prevailing across all of the countries that we covered in Central Africa. So it became obvious that we needed to do something. And then we launched in September 2017 through our Intergovernmental Committee of Senior Experts in Douala, what we call the Douala Consensus. So that's why I have here, of course, there's a little, I like to be sometimes agent provocateur. So that's why I say we even have our own consensus, which this is in contrast to other consensus. The 2017 Douala Consensus on Economic Diversification through Resource-Driven and Trade-Induced Industrialization. So this is a clear, argument that whilst, of course, some of the measures that came with other consensus, which was really about fix your macro, address all of those factors and so on and so forth, we say, yes, absolutely, we need to pursue that, but we need also to address the structural problems that are behind all of those, booms and busts, hence the Douala Consensus. And the Made in Central Africa was the publication that really tried to capture all of those dimensions. So Made in Central Africa from a vicious to a virtual cycle. Because I'm speaking in English, I'm translating this, which is in French. So Made in Central Africa, du cercle vicieux au cercle vertueux. Okay, so, and we haven't been shy on advocacy. We've been, talking about these things forever. The latest, is through this publication by the International Resources Panel, where we've articulated what kind of governance we require in the 21st century. And this is where we've introduced the concept of sustained development license to operate. In contrast to this to the social license to operate, which was restrictive to mining operations. Here, we argue that for us to really change the sector, we need to bring stakeholders across the entire globe. All the multi-stakeholders which referred there before, from mining companies to investors to consumers and so on and so forth. So again, if you have time, you please read. On the right is the letter which I referred to earlier, which was to the President of the General Assembly. Those that know my signature will see that on the left-hand side, that's my signature. And on the left-hand side is Joe, who was the co-chair of the panel at that time. Not of the panel, of the thematic group of the Sustainable Development Solutions. So what is important now, when we organized the big table in 2007, one of the arguments that was put there was that for Africa to break new ground, it was important that it establish its own resource companies. So because of all of the problems that are associated with, I would say some of the companies which are not local, we are now seeing some of those companies. Like, for example, Dangote Petroleum. I mean, Dangote, as you know, is a big player in cement industry. Is a big player in fertilizers. Is a big player in petroleum. So that's very good news that we are starting having our own companies. Because, for example, in terms of linkages, perhaps they'll be much more motivated to deepen those linkages than foreign companies which have their own value chains outside of the continent. And the other one is OCP, or Office Chérifien de Phosphate. This is a Moroccan company, the largest producer of phosphates in the world, which, I mean, really building linkages across Africa and in Morocco in particular. So this is good. The question is, are we really witnessing a significant structural change, or it is business as usual, and then we have one or two spots here and there that could perhaps be different than the reality? That's the question. I'm just putting questions, not giving any answer. Perhaps the discussants will give more answers. So, and now that everybody's talking about just energy transitions, about the path to net zero, the question becomes, in this particular, and Africa, of course, dominates the sector because of its critical minerals or green minerals, as Marit calls it, and Africa also calls it. Can this time around Africa secure a just and orderly transition? Can we ensure that in that process we do not have our mineral resources fossilized, in other words, become stranded? There's a possibility, and we need to be mindful of that. So these publications, again, you will have insights about the issues. And there is no other country where perhaps in the discussion on just energy transitions, especially those driven by green minerals, this is much more clear than in the case of DRC. DRC, as you know, has 70% of the cobalt resources of the world, and yet it's again, as many of our countries on the continent is exports raw materials, and it's locked in a value chain that is globally is only about $11 billion, whilst the value chain of electric vehicles is about now $60 trillion. So $11 billion, $60 trillion. So $60 trillion is that's the direction of travel. And in this effort there, where a lot of colleagues here, some of the colleagues present here, played a role, we tried to articulate the pathways to ensure that DRC and the rest of the continent will be part of that bonanza of the $60 trillion by indeed promoting value addition, by creating value chains, and so on. So the three or so next slides are basically about this, and I'll go very fast on that so that we can hear the voices of our discussants. So this was informed. So we organized in November 2021 the DRC Africa Business Forum, and to inform the discussions during the forum, we had this study which we commissioned by Bloomberg that demonstrated the production of battery precursors in DRC was 3 times cheaper than in the United States and China, and 2 times cheaper than in Poland. And then the question then became, during the conversation, with such strong fundamentals, if we can add the fact that the emissions profile of DRC were 25% better than China. For obvious reasons, we don't have to transport all of the cobalt and other minerals to long distances. With all of those strong fundamentals, why is it that the rest of the world is not interested in localizing the value chain in Africa? That's the question. Those are some of the issues which, again, I hope to get answers from my discussants. So this, again, reiterates the same thing about comparative advantage and what was at stake. This, we've working with different parts of ECA, we managed to take it to the pre-feasibility study. And as you know, at this stage, we are in the process of establishing the value chain in Kolwezi and in 2 sites in Zambia, Ndola and Lusaka, for the localization of the value chain. And this would create, so when we organized the DRC Africa Business Forum, it was not also only about mining. Our argument was that localizing the battery and electric vehicles value chains in Africa would enable us to expand the deployment of renewable energy, would, in other words, enable us to achieve mineral security, enable our 600 million people have access to energy, because, of course, off-grid solutions through solar is one path towards ensuring that more people have access to energy. So, hence the title again, Extractives and Economic Diversification. Okay, so we should do this to avoid that we don't have a game of winners and losers. That has been the case since colonial times, where Africa has been always a loser, and these publications try and discuss that. And you will see in the Secretary General's effort with the establishment of the international of the panel on critical energy transition minerals, a reference to justice. So the next slides will talk about the Secretary General's panel. If you could kindly go to the next slide. And with your permission, let me read just that first paragraph. For developing countries, critical minerals are a critical opportunity to create jobs, diversify economies, and dramatically boost revenues. Critical minerals could be a golden ticket to sustainable development, but only if they are managed properly. The race to net zero cannot trample over the poor. The renewables revolution is happening, but we must guide it towards justice. So my reference to justice here is importance. Justice to whom, and justice on how that justice will be sort of reflected. So many of the publications that I referred to earlier, including improving public participation in sustainable development of minerals in Africa, it's really about articulating what that justice is all about, and what the platforms that we need to create with a view to ensure that every voice is heard and is counted in the design of these solutions. So the principles are here. I think, again, I'm recognizing your role, Marit, here. She was member of the panel. She contributed to defining these principles. So if you want to ask about the principles, please contact her. She will provide more about that. So it has gone beyond the principles. Now you have a guidance, which again gives you more tools to ensure that this is a just transition with justice. So I'm almost there. Next slide. So during Mining Indaba 2025, many of the people that were there were saying that Africa, we are entering now a golden age for African mining sector. And my question is whether this is a pipe dream and whether we weren't there before. And again, no answers. In the next slide, this is Ernst Young publication. Every year they identify what are the top 10 risks and opportunities for mining and metals company. But what I wanted to really focus in, the risks are there, you can read later, is what that statement is, that now is the time for organizations to act, to transform, to shape the future with confidence. And my question is, do we have, I mean, as Africa, do we have favorable tailwinds? Can we address the headwinds? And you know what I'm referring to there. And paradigms matter. We had wanted to have Albert from the World Bank here as one of the discussants. Unfortunately, he is not available. But here, I'm contrasting two publications done by the same organization. One is John Strongman's publication on strategy for African mining. This was done during the Washington Consensus time. It was basically an argument to ask the states to get out of mining, to privatize the industrial sector, the mining sector, and so on and so forth. I mean, for good reasons, because the continent was not attracting investment. There were all sorts of factors. And then this publication, a much more recent, by James Cast and Albert Zufak, were editors, where it's about harnessing natural resources for economic transformation during the low carbon transition. So well, the question is, do we have a favorable paradigm now? Are the international is the international global architecture or international or global architecture favorable and would support Africa's aspirations? That's another question. And then I say, what should we do differently? Again, I'm not answering this. I am closing my presentation with two of the last slides. One is really going back to this Otto Sharma. Otto Sharma is a professor in MIT, and he has a very nice book which is called Theory U. But what I like here is his quote, which is, "The power of attention is the real superpower of our age. Attention aligned with intention can make mountains move." My reference to one thing leads to another, again, is really about sometimes our difficulties in having attention to detail and in staying the course. And this is really needed if we want to promote change. So I believe in the power of attention, and I believe that attention aligned with intention can indeed make difference and ensure that we break new ground. In the next slide, I go back to Daniel Frank's. In this book here, Mountain Movers, Mining Sustainability and the Agents of Change, I mean, he discusses a couple of people that, according to him, were agents of change. And so the question is whether, and it includes, it starts also with Luke Danielson and the MMSD process. So my question is, indeed, 20 plus years after the MMSD process, have we broke any ground here? And I like the quote inside the book, which says that even the powerless can move mountains when they are powered by hope. And I have hope. Thank you very much.
Please, can we give him a round of applause, please? Thank you very much, Pedro. We've got 103 participants online.